What would you do if the only thing keeping your baby alive was slipping away in your arms? That question haunted Jack Turner every sleepless night since the day his wife, Mary, died. Dry Willow, Colorado, early spring 1879. The snow still clung stubbornly to the corners of the hills, refusing to melt. The wind tore through the valley, sharp as broken glass, cutting across the Turner Ranch where fences leaned and cottonwoods stood bare. Inside a weather-beaten cabin, the air smelled of smoke and damp wool. Jack sat slouched beside the dying fire, his boots muddy, shirt half-buttoned, and eyes hollow from days without rest. In his arms, his tiny daughter Lily wailed, her small fists trembling, her face red with hunger. "Come on, baby girl, please," he whispered, voice cracking as he tried to feed her again. The bottle shook in his hand. The goat's milk had gone warm over the flames, but Lily turned away, refusing. Milk spilled down her chin and soaked into her blanket. Her cry grew weaker but more desperate. Jack's shoulders slumped, his body trembling from exhaustion. He hadn't slept a full night since Mary died. She bled out before the midwife could save her, leaving him alone with a child too small to fight the world's cruelty. He buried Mary on a Tuesday. That same day, Lily turned 2 weeks old. Now, 2 months later, the baby was starving. Jack had tried everything: goat's milk, rice water, even sugar water once, though he'd regretted it when Lily screamed harder. He'd walked from one ranch to another, begging for help. "My girl needs milk," he'd said, his voice breaking each time. "Does anyone have a nursing wife?" Most doors closed kindly. Some closed without a word. Now, as the wind clawed at the windows and the fire burned low, Jack felt the weight of helplessness crushing his chest. He stood slowly, rocking Lily in his arms, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. He pinned a small piece of paper to the outside of his cabin door. The note, written in uneven letters, read, "If anyone has milk to spare, please help my baby girl." He shut the door against the wind and sank back beside the hearth. Lily's cries had softened into tiny gasps, her strength fading. Jack pressed his lips to her forehead. His rough, calloused hands trembled as he held her close. "I'm trying," he whispered. "I swear I'm trying." The fire popped and hissed, throwing shadows that danced along the walls. The baby whimpered. Jack leaned back, eyes closing just for a second, but her tiny cry jolted him awake again. He had fought wild horses, faced storms that tore barns apart, and buried the only woman he ever loved. But none of that compared to this helplessness, the terror of watching his child slip away while his hands could do nothing. Outside, the rain began, thin at first, then hard, slicing sideways through the cold air. The cabin creaked under the wind's force. Jack paced, clutching Lily close, her breath shallow against his chest. The bottle lay on the floor, rolling slowly back and forth. The fire was fading too. He had already burned everything he could: scraps of wood, old furniture, even Mary's rocking chair. The room grew dim and cold. Then came the knock. 3 sharp knocks, cutting through the storm. Jack froze. For a second, he thought it was the wind, but it came again. Firm, human. He opened the door, and the cold wind rushed in, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine. A woman stood there. Her blonde hair was plastered to her cheeks, her shawl soaked, boots sunken in mud. She looked pale and worn, but her eyes were steady. "I saw your note," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I've heard her crying at night." Quote, Jack blinked, confused, his body too tired to understand Maggie, he said at last, recognizing her from the neighboring homestead down the ridge. She nodded, clutching her shawl tighter. "Let me feed her." "Please." Jack stared, unsure he heard right. Then Maggie spoke again, her voice breaking. "My son passed 6 weeks ago. He was 11 weeks old. I still have milk. I have to do something with it. Please, let me help her." For a moment, Jack couldn't speak. His throat burned. Then he stepped aside. Maggie entered, dripping rain onto the floorboards. She set down her satchel and moved closer to the fire, her eyes on the crying baby. Lily's face was red and slick with tears, her breath shallow. Maggie asked quietly. Jack hesitated, then handed over the baby. Maggie sat in the old rocker near the hearth, her movements tender, instinctive. She cradled Lily close, humming softly, and unbuttoned the top of her dress. Jack turned away, staring into the dark window, his jaw tight. Then he heard it, the faint sound of suckling, wet and desperate, followed by the gentlest sigh. Lily's cries stopped. Silence, save for the rain tapping the window panes and the crackle of the fire. Jack's shoulders slumped, his eyes closed. The ache in his chest loosened just a little. Maggie looked down at the baby, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "She's so hungry," she whispered. "She hasn't eaten in almost a day," Jack said hoarsely. Maggie smiled faintly, eyes softening. "She looks strong." Like her father, Jack swallowed, voice breaking. "Thank you." Maggie looked up at him, her lips trembling. "I needed this too," she said quietly, "more than you know." By the next morning, Lily's color had returned. The baby slept peacefully against Maggie's chest by the fire. Jack watched from the corner of the room, saying nothing, just listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. The cabin no longer felt haunted by loss. It felt, for the first time in months, alive. Outside, the snow was melting. The wind had softened. And though neither of them knew what would come next, something had changed in that small cabin at the edge of Dry Willow. A man who had lost everything, and a woman who still carried milk meant for a child gone too soon, had found one another through the same small, fragile miracle of life. The days that followed passed like soft whispers across the valley. The frost still clung to the mornings, but inside the Turner cabin, warmth had returned, not just from the fire, but from the sound of life. Each dawn, Maggie rose before the sun, moving quietly through the dim light, nursing Lily beside the hearth while Jack chopped wood outside. The baby's tiny breaths filled the silence, and the house that once echoed with grief now hummed with a gentle rhythm of footsteps, crackling fire, and the soft sound of milk and love restoring what was once broken. Jack still didn't quite know how to act around her. He mumbled short thanks, fixed things that didn't need fixing, and kept himself busy from dawn to dusk. He'd patch fences, mend harnesses, or haul water twice when once was enough. But in small ways, his gratitude showed. A clean blanket folded neatly by her cot. A bowl of stew waiting on the table. A mended latch on the window she always struggled to close. Maggie noticed everything, though she never said a word. She could feel the heaviness in him, the guilt of a man who thought he'd failed, and the fear of caring again. She didn't try to fix it. She simply stayed. By the third morning, she'd moved her few things into the small side room, the old tack space that once smelled of rope and saddle oil. Jack had cleared it himself, dusted the floor, and dragged in a cot. When she found it ready, she stood there for a long moment, her hand over her mouth, before whispering, "Thank you," to no one in particular. Every night after Lily slept, they would sit near the fire, Maggie knitting quietly, Jack sipping coffee gone cold. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was full of what neither of them could say, but both could feel. On the fifth night, Maggie broke it. "I held him for 2 days," she said softly, her eyes on the fire. Jack looked up slowly. "My boy." She said he died from fever. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there waiting for someone to come. No one did. Not until... She paused, her breath trembling. Not until he started to smell. The words broke in the air like glass. Jack didn't speak. He only leaned forward, added another log to the fire, and handed her a cup of coffee. Maggie took it with shaking hands, nodding once. "Thank you," she whispered. That night she cried quietly while Lily slept, and for the first time since her son's death, the tears felt like a release instead of a punishment. The days stretched into weeks. Maggie cared for Lily as if she'd been born from her own body. Jack worked the land with a strength he didn't realize he still had. Together, they found a quiet balance, two broken souls mending in the light of a child's laughter. But not everyone saw it that way. When Maggie rode into town one Saturday to buy flour and soap, she could feel the stares before she even reached the mercantile steps. The spring thaw had brought people out, and their whispers too. She's living with him, you know. A widow feeding another woman's baby like it's her own. Milk's not the only thing she's offering. The words stung sharper than the wind. No one said them to her face, but they said them loud enough. Maggie kept her chin up, her hands tight around her basket. But when she caught her reflection in the window glass, pale, thin, tired, shame crept up her throat like poison. By the time she returned to the ranch, her arms trembled. She handed Jack the supplies without a word and disappeared into her room. Jack didn't ask. He didn't need to. That night, while hammering a loose board on the porch, he overheard two ranch hands riding by from the neighboring fields. "Bet he's got her warming his bed, too," one man said. The other laughed. Wouldn't blame him. But can't see why the kid sucking on another man's wife's tit. Jack froze. His jaw clenched, the hammer trembling in his hand. He didn't shout, didn't move, just stood there in the dark until the sound of the horses faded into the night. Then he walked back inside. The cabin felt colder somehow. Maggie sat in the rocker, Lily asleep against her chest. She didn't look up. Her eyes were hollow, her face pale. Jack set the food on the table, waited, then turned and walked back outside. The door shut softly behind him. That night, rain fell again. Thin, cold, steady. Maggie sat in the rocker long after the fire went out, staring into the dying embers. Her body trembled, not from the cold, but from the shame twisting inside her. She looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and whispered through her tears, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I never did." Quote. And before dawn, while Jack slept in the front room, boots still on and rifle by the door, Maggie wrapped Lily in a quilt, held her close, and slipped into the storm. The path to the barn was dark and slick with mud. The rain soaked her hair, her dress, her bones. Lily cried softly against her chest, and Maggie's heart broke with every sound. "I just wanted to help," she whispered, voice trembling. "That's all. I just wanted to help." Inside the barn, the air was cold and heavy, with the smell of old hay. Maggie sank into a corner, clutching Lily tight. Thunder rolled over the hills, and rain hammered the roof. She pressed her lips to the baby's head and whispered, "I love you, baby. I stayed for you. I swear I stayed for you." She cried until her body shook, until the storm outside became one with the storm in her chest. She didn't see the faint blue light of dawn creeping over the hills. She didn't hear the cabin door slam open, or Jack's desperate voice calling her name, "Maggie! Maggie!" The storm had swallowed the sound, but Jack didn't stop calling. The storm raged like a wounded animal across the prairie. The wind tore through the trees, and the snow came down thick and hard, erasing the land into a blur of white. Inside the Turner cabin, the cradle sat empty, the blanket gone. Jack woke to silence, the kind that makes a man's blood run cold. "Maggie," he called, voice rough with sleep. No answer. He threw on his coat, grabbed his rifle, and burst through the door into the freezing wind. The world was swallowed by snow, his breath turning to fog before his eyes. He looked toward the barn, then to the south field, nothing but white. Then, faintly, through the howling air, he thought he heard it. A baby's cry carried by the wind. He ran. The snow clawed at his boots, the cold biting through his clothes, but he didn't stop. He stumbled over the fence line and into the yard, calling her name again and again. "Maggie! Where are you?" Then he saw it, a flicker of movement by the old lumber shed, the door swinging in the wind. Jack sprinted, his heart pounding, and threw the door open. Inside, the air was cold and still. The smell of hay and rust hung heavy. In the far corner, Maggie sat curled on the floor, holding Lily against her chest. Her hair was wet, her dress soaked through, her lips pale. Lily whimpered weakly in her arms. Maggie rocked her, whispering through her tears. "I thought maybe I shouldn't stay," she said, voice trembling as Jack dropped to his knees beside her. "They're right, Jack. I'm not her mother. Jack didn't speak at first." He took off his coat and wrapped it around both of them, his hands shaking not from the cold but from the fear of what he might have lost. "You didn't take her from me," he whispered, voice breaking. "You gave her back to me." Maggie froze, staring at him through tears. Then she broke, collapsing against his shoulder, sobbing into his chest. Jack held her tighter, pulling her close, his body shielding them from the cold. Lily stirred between them, her cries softening. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside that shed, warmth grew, from skin, from breath, from the weight of two broken souls clinging to the only thing still pure in their lives. They stayed like that until the storm quieted, until the light of morning crept through the cracks in the boards. By sunrise, the snow had settled, glittering silver under the pale sky. Jack carried Lily in one arm, his coat draped around Maggie's shoulders as they walked back toward the cabin. The air was still, calm, as if the storm had washed the world clean. Inside, Jack lit the fire again. Maggie sat by it, cradling Lily, her eyes red but peaceful. She watched Jack move, the way he checked the windows, the way his hands steadied as he poured her a cup of warm milk. When he turned, their eyes met. "You don't ever have to run again," he said quietly. "Not from me." And for the first time, Maggie smiled without hiding it. By the next morning, sunlight spilled through the cabin windows. Maggie woke to the smell of bread baking and the sound of hammering. She wrapped Lily in a blanket and followed the noise to the small room next to Jack's. There, Jack knelt on the floor beside a newly built wooden crib. His sleeves were rolled up, sawdust on his arms. He was carving letters into the headboard. Lily Turner. Beneath that, smaller letters read, "Stay." He looked up when he heard her. "I wasn't sure how to ask," he said softly. Maggie's breath caught. On the table beside him lay a folded quilt, a small shelf with wooden toys, and a piece of paper weighted by a smooth stone. She stepped closer and read the note. "Stay." Not as a helper, as her mother. Her hands trembled. Jack stood, uncertain, his eyes filled with something raw and honest. It wasn't a proposal, not a promise written in gold. It was something deeper, a choice. Maggie looked down at Lily in her arms. The baby's cheeks were full again, her lips soft and pink. "I didn't just save her," Maggie whispered, tears filling her eyes. "She saved me too." Jack stepped closer. "I never thought I'd have another family," he said quietly. "But I can't imagine this place without you." Maggie smiled. "The kind that comes from deep inside. The kind that heals what once felt unfixable." 3 years later, the ranch had changed. The storms had passed, the land greener, the fences mended. The sign at the front gate read Turner and Rowe Ranch. Lily ran across the yard, her laughter ringing like bells. Maggie sat on the porch steps, one hand resting on her round belly. Jack stood beside the barn, carving the last letters into a wooden post. He carried it to the gate and set it in place. Together they planted a young apple tree beside it, Lily helping with her tiny hands. "What if it doesn't grow?" Lily asked. Jack knelt beside her, brushing her hair back. "Then we try again," he said. "But this one's strong, like you." "And Mama," Lily added proudly. Jack looked at Maggie, smiling softly. "She's the strongest of us all." Quote, "The wind carried the scent of spring through the valley. The apple blossoms had not yet bloomed, but they would, in time, like their love, rooted in pain, nourished by choice." That night, the family sat on the porch, watching the stars. Lily slept inside, her small arms wrapped around the wooden mare Jack had carved for her. The fire glowed warm through the window. Maggie leaned her head against Jack's shoulder. "You know what I think about sometimes," she whispered. "What?" "How I came here with nothing but milk and grief," she said. Jack kissed her hair. "You gave her more than milk," he said softly. You gave her a mother." Maggie looked at him, her eyes glistening. "She gave me more than I ever gave her. She said she gave me you." They sat in silence, hands entwined, the stars shimmering above them. The wind rustled the new apple tree by the fence. Its roots were deep now, strong and alive, just like their love. "If the tree ever blooms," they had once said, "our love will live with it." And each spring it did. The woman who came with nothing but milk and grief found a home. The man who lost everything found a reason to hope again. And the baby they saved became the bridge between them. Love had returned to Dry Willow, quiet, real, and everlasting.